Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marissa Thompson. I am the adult librarian for the Lakeview Terrace Library, part of the Los Angeles Public Library System. Today's program is Access to Capital for Business 101, presented by Dr. Stephanie Audrey. So having had an extensive career in the private sector, Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, DBA, has trained thousands of entrepreneurs nationally through professional training platforms. Additionally, Dr. Ardrey is an adjunct professor teaching in the Master and Bachelor of Science and Arts programs at the California State University, Los Angeles, University of California, Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Southwest College. Dr. Stephanie is also a SCORE volunteer in an informational presentation on capital. SCORE is the nation's largest network of volunteer expert business mentors and is dedicated to helping small businesses get off the ground, grow, and achieve their goals. SCORE is a 501c3 nonprofit organization and a resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA. Take it away, Dr. Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marissa. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome again to Access for Capital for Businesses 101. We're going to jump right in. One, I'd like to thank the Los Angeles Public Library for the opportunity to present this content to you today. I hope it will be informative and helpful with you in your efforts to raise capital for your business. I'm president and CEO of a company called Blue Diamond Capital, which is in Newport Beach, California. As was shared, I have had a long history as an entrepreneur. Prior to us going live, I mentioned a fun fact that, in fact, I had my first business as a contractor with the California State Library Association, where my contract was to set up the operations for the Second Start adult literacy program in the Oakland, Maine library. I went on from there to build an advertising agency that ultimately was a $250 million backed joint venture where we had 8 offices, 400 employees. At the time, I think I was probably the youngest person on my staff, still in my mid-20s. So I have been an entrepreneur for now many decades and have worked with a number of organizations. The early part of my career was focused on advertising and marketing communications. Later, I moved into real estate, finance, and development, and then finally, venture capital and venture finance. Today, our objective will be to go over and have you walk away with a clear understanding of what your funding goals are for your organization. I introduce you to a concept of using both a situational analysis along with a SWOT analysis, which is a great tool to use when evaluating your business internally and externally. I ask you to contemplate the business vision again from the perspective of the vision and the mission, and I give you a reference point to how we're using those two terms in this particular conversation. I challenge you to think about the market knowledge that you have and if there have been any changes in that market so that your business plans are timely and accurate, as well as your capital requirements are realistic. I want you to think about growth opportunities which may exist within your industry or sector. And then we want to distinguish funding between debt and equity so that you have a ability to have an understanding in terms of the vocabulary that's used between debt and equity sources of capital. Hopefully you'll be able to, at that point, begin to identify some specific goals for your organization, set up an action plan, a particular budget, some success measures, and then recognizing that at the end of bringing capital into your organization, that capital typically is looking for a way to exit your organization. So what does an exit look like? And that can be something as simple as recapitalizing your business at a later point. So we're going to discuss all of these possibilities. Don't worry, it's going to be fun. Normally, we would go through a pitch, but because in the essence of time, we're not going to go through the 30-second elevator pitch. But I want you to keep this information in mind because you will be able to get a copy of the slide deck on whenever you have an opportunity to present those 30-second elevator pitch. You want to make sure that you immediately describe your business from the standpoint of the value proposition that you are offering to customers, your value proposition or your benefits, because that's what the prospect is listening for. And so the more succinctly you can deliver that information, the better opportunity you have to potentially convert that person to a customer. Okay. So when we talked about our learning objectives, the very first question I ask is, what is the business vision? And for the sake of our conversation, we're going to look at vision as being, how will this business look 10 years in the future? Okay. We use mission as an evolving set of accomplishments in intervals of about 3 to 5 years. And so that's how we refer to the mission. So the mission becomes dynamic. And as you accomplish specific objectives around that mission, you're leading to the ultimate destination of what the vision looks like for your business. And when we talk about that destination, it has a lot to do with how we describe and quantify organizations. So, for example, I might ask you, do you see your business becoming a Fortune 100, a Fortune 500, an Inc. 100, a large player in your local market? What would be the size and scale of the organization that you're creating? Sometimes you're creating an organization that's going to remain small by size and by the purpose of the business. For example, if you are operating, say you are a physician and you just have a private practice, because of the licensing requirements, you may be focused on being a sole operator in that particular organization. And as a result, you're going to end up, as with any organization, hitting a max in terms of the capacity that your organization would be able to handle with one particular physician. If it is that you imagine building a practice, maybe where you have a team of physicians, maybe you have physicians in several markets, then that again defines the type of organization and the size and scale. And it also begins to inform the capital requirements, because again, capital is the fuel that helps to fund the organization. So once you have this idea of the vision for your organization, then you want to validate that there really is a market opportunity. And the reason you need to validate that there's a market opportunity is dependent upon the capital source that you're pursuing. You are going to need to prepare financials, and those financials need to take into consideration the price of the particular product, what is the sales cycle, and what is it that you're projecting to do in volume in terms of operating that business, and what would be the cost of those operations, so that again, whatever this capital source is can determine if you have the ability to generate cash flow to either support the debt, if you are taking on debt, or are you able to generate enough cash flow and value to create some type of return for the equity stakeholders? So whichever way that you're going about capitalizing the venture, there's an interest in terms of ensuring that the venture has the ability to service that particular debt. And so then from there, when you understand what you see as the market opportunity, you're now poised to begin to think about how you should actually fund that growth. And oftentimes, funding that growth is through what we call a layered strategy, which I'm going to go into greater detail. And then what type of funding options exist? Debt or equity, those particular exit strategies. And then at the end, you're going to create this fund map. So let's go. So it's very important to consider where your business, or if you have a portfolio of products, where they are along the life cycle. Are you starting a brand new business and you're in the intro phase? Are you operating a business that you've been operating and you're looking to transition from the intro phase? You've gained market traction and you want to move into a growth phase. Are you operating or growing a business in a mature market? Or are you in a sector or industry that is on the way to decline? And that can apply to either the sector that your business operates within, or it could apply to a particular product that you might have if you have a portfolio of products within your organization. And so every organization, I know some solopreneurs will say, wait a second, not us. No, you do. You might be wearing the hats, but each organization has what's called the company value chain. And these are all of the activities that must happen in order to move a product through the process of concept to the end customer, and how that relationship is maintained with the objective to create a profit. So there's general administration, there's human resources, be they internal or external resources. You have R&D, technology, you have systems developments. If you have suppliers, there's supply chain management, there are typical day-to-day operations. How are you getting your product or service through its distribution points and sales channels? You have sales and marketing. How do you maintain your clients after you have successfully delivered a product or service? And doing all of these things profitably. That's the aim of an entrepreneurial venture, is to do all of these things and to make a profit. And so one place to begin is to make sure that you are aware of your organization. And I love using the SWOT analysis tool because oftentimes, again, when we are actively running our business, it takes time to pause and work on the business strategy. But it's important. So don't forget it. Don't leave it out. But I do recognize that sometimes we're caught up in the day-to-day operations, and finding that moment to step aside and update the business plans can seem challenging and in some cases tedious. So this is a good, what I call quick and dirty. You can do it in bullet point form, and you can do it while you're just sitting having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in the morning and browsing your business paper. You want to look internal in your organization across those value chain functions. So for example, when you think about the company value chain, the general administration, HR, all of these are the internal areas of your organization. These are the things that you influence and control. And so your SWOT analysis, you want to look across these particular functional domains and identify the strengths and the weaknesses within your organization. Next, you want to look external to your organization, the opportunities and the threats. And these are things that you do not control. So make sure that you're clear in separating the things that you do not control. These are things that happen if you're a business that offers a service, and as the population grows, you have more opportunities for customers. You have no direct influence over the population growing, but you see an opportunity in basically having a consumer base that's expanding. So that is your opportunity, as well as threats. What's happening in the macro market as it relates to global influence? Are there global influences that impact your local market? What's happening politically? in a regulatory environment, and how are those things impacting your organization. So again, threats you do not have direct control over, but you want to have some type of mitigation measures in place for things that you can anticipate. Now, I get it. We can't anticipate everything. So, for example, we know that there are bull and bear markets in the stocks, right? We don't know exactly when a bull or a bear market might happen, but we know that there are some indicators that begin to have investors start to question if they're nearing the end of a respective cycle. And so, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we want to be aware of those kinds of shifts, because if those shifts directly impact our business, then we want to always sort of have an awareness so that we can mitigate some of the impacts of those potential future risks. So, when we're thinking about the strategic fiscal planning process, you want to think about, again, you've looked now at this SWOT analysis. You've identified from there some specific objectives that you need to accomplish. And again, I said when we're working on the mission, we're doing them in about a 36-month interval and another 36-month interval, ultimately aimed at getting your business to that vision destination that you've identified about 10 years in the future. Because we're coming out of a global pandemic, using a mission that's aimed at about 36 months is probably a great target and a great place to start. Because as the market and the country and the world begins to reset, all coming back online at rollout strategies, then certainly, things may have changed with some of your customers. So you want to check in. Opportunities may have been presented. So you certainly want to look and identify those opportunities. And so then determining where you're going to go as it relates to, we're going to increase our advertising, we're going to roll out a new product or a service, we're going to take a component of our business online. So whatever it is that you're planning for your business over the next 36 months, you want to begin to identify those things so that you have an idea of the amount of capital that's required. And it's important because a lot of times people don't connect immediately why strategy is so essential. But your strategy identifies how you are not only in the market, but it helps you with identifying your competitive initiatives and your approach to business and how then you need to finance those things. Typically, when I'm discussing capital, I say that we want to think about, or a high level conversation regarding strategy includes looking at the capital requirements, understanding the capacity. What is the organizational capacity? So when you go back and look at that company value chain, do you have internal or external stakeholders who are occupying those roles or functions within your organizations? And what's the cost for that capacity? And then the last overarching C being the customers. Do you have sufficient customer demand between your primary, secondary, and tertiary markets? Or are there opportunities that perhaps you had not considered, but are now available for consideration? And so understanding those competitive initiatives and your approach to business then helps you with defining what the business value propositions are, as well as how the business can effectively make a profit delivering on that value proposition. And that makes up the business model for the organization. But in business, cash is king. Everything about the business is about understanding the cash. The importance of cash. According to Guy Kawasaki, everything is about cash. Raising it, conserving it, collecting it. And more often, the cause of common business failure is a cash crisis. And too often organizations or entrepreneurs find themselves there only because they didn't think in advance about the possibilities for their business and didn't think around those 3 C's: capital, capacity, and customers, and where there might be shifts in any of those areas and how those shifts impact the organization. So when you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to finance a business, you need to recognize that you're going to cast a wide net, because not all capital resources are the same. Not all capital resources are the same. So you need to understand that so that you can distinguish and also understand which capital is best for the immediate objective, as well as recognizing at what stage or phase of development your business is in. So when you're putting together a strategy, I like to use what's called a layered strategy. And so what that means is, for some business, we carve out elements of items that need to be capitalized that can assist in that process. So if I'm getting equipment for a client, then I want them to use equipment lenders to finance that equipment, because that equipment serves as its own collateral. And I don't want them to be over collateralized in some areas and therefore be limited by the capital that they can receive, because unfortunately, one lender took the liberty of taking all of the available assets to collateralize their note, but that is not really consistent with the true value of that collateral. Okay, so there's 3 types of capital that you're going to be looking at. Fixed capital is capital that you're using to make purchases, permanent or fixed assets like building, equipment, land. The next category of capital includes your working capital. And this is the capital that you're using to support your day-to-day operations. If you require inventory or inputs to your business, then this is the capital that's used for that. This is the capital that you use to pay salaries, to pay business operations and wages. And then the last type of capital is growth. And this is saying that your business has an opportunity to grow. It's important to make sure that you identify the capital necessary to support that growth. Growth may require that you take on new employees. You may need to take on a larger amount of inventory, anything to expand your business. You may need to set up a new base of operations. All of those types of activities are activities that are generated as a result of growth. But oftentimes you need capital to support those types of opportunities, because the capital that you're generating from operations might be sufficient to maintain the operations, but it's not sufficient enough to finance an expansion, especially if you have big investment amounts that are required. And so let's talk more about funding. So equity capital. Equity capital represents the personal investment of the owners in the business. It is considered risk capital because it is at risk. So if the business fails, all of the equity capital goes away. So you could lose it all, as they say. But if it is that the business is seeking outside equity capital, such as outside third-party investors, then it's a similar thing. Those investors become stakeholders, meaning owners of the organization, based on their percentage, based on the money that they have invested in the organization. And investors expect to get some type of return. And so when we're thinking about equity, here are some of the typical sources for equity to finance your company. Typically, the owners, so whoever the principals are in the organization, they initially put up their equity in order to get the business launched. And then you have your three F's. We call those fondly our friends, family, and fools. And then you have the last category, which include angels, high net worth individuals, family offices, venture capitalists, or institutional investors. And unless you are building an organization that is planning to grow, scale, and exit through some type of public offering, then you probably are not going to be too involved with family offices, VCs, or institutional type investors. They tend to have requirements of bringing capital into unicorn type growing organizations, those organizations that are going to become multi-billion dollar organizations. So with debt capital, debt is a different type of capital that must be repaid with interest. The debt, liability, and interest are carried on the company's balance sheet. Depending upon where you are with your phase of development within your business will influence your ability to get debt capital. Because in the beginning, when you're a new business, you do not have a financial track record. And so lenders are pretty cautious, conservative, we'd say, with making those types of commitments. And that's when you want to understand and be very creative with how you approach debt. Oftentimes, what an entrepreneur does is they go, I'm starting a business, and they're transitioning from perhaps being an employee. So as an employee, they've been doing bank with what I like to call retail banks. So they're doing bank with the popular, your Wells, your Bank of America, Chase, all of those types of organizations, which are really set up to support consumers. They're consumer banks. So they're widely available, easy access, and their primary focus is speaking to consumers. Now, these banks also have business customers, but they handle their business customers often through business banking relationships and accounts. And typically for those banks, because they are multinational and many global banks, their business customers are large multinational organizations as well. So even though as a newly minted entrepreneur, you could set up a business account with them, it wouldn't be to your benefit because you're too small typically to be on their radar to get the kind of support that you need as a business to help to grow your business. So I would say that you want to look for a smaller business bank within your community. Typically look for those that demonstrate that they have been SBA lenders, meaning that they participate in the Small Business Administration Loan Program, which is aimed at supporting small businesses that typically are unable to secure capital from other resources. So those are the types of lenders that you want to begin to build relationships with. And so when going for debt, you're looking at loans. Typically, they're looking for some form of collateral, but collateral can be more than real estate. Collateral could be dividends if you have dividends that are in an account, an interest-bearing account, or you have shares of stocks that pay dividends. If you have royalties or you have a 401k program, or if you have insurance, those are also additional tools that can be used as collateral to assist with gaining capital when your business is in its early stages of formation. So there are several secrets to financing a business, and you want to make sure in the beginning that you recognize and choose some of the right sources of capital. And remember that as the business continues to evolve, you're going to continue to need capital. So you're going to continue to build these relationships. What you need to know is that there is a lot of money out there, but you need to understand where to look and which sources of funds are the right sources for your business. If it is you are launching a business that requires outside equity, you need to have a budget to raise capital. It does cost money to raise capital. First, you need to hire a securities lawyer to assist you with understanding the legal requirements around an equity offering to third parties. Because now, when you're talking about selling interest or ownership in your business, you're actually selling securities. So you want to make sure that you are aware of and have competent legal counsel to explain the various options to make sure that you go about this process properly. You don't want to run afoul of the SEC. Again, creativity counts. The internet gives you access to a number of resources that can be helpful when you're looking for ways to finance capital. Definitely, you want to understand as you begin to identify the sources of capital, what these particular sources require so that you approach them and you're prepared. Remember, when you're talking about capital, it's a money conversation. So whomever you're speaking with regarding money is gonna want to talk about the financials. They're interested perhaps in the business that you're doing, but their number one interest is around the money that you plan to make, because it's the money that's going to influence their ability. If it is that you're talking about a debt source, it's the financings that allows them to determine if it is the business can sustain servicing the debt requirement. The same thing from the equity. The equity investors are not requiring you to service a debt in a monthly payment, but at some point they want to exit the business and they would like to see that the business was able to generate a return for them for that investment that they made. And so you need to understand that when you start having that equity conversation, you're building a relationship. So you wouldn't walk up to someone on the street and say, "Hi, marry me." Ah, hopefully they would run in the other direction. If they said, "Okay," then you might need to run in the other direction. Think about that in the context of approaching prospective investors. They're not going to want to just marry you right away. They're going to want to perform due diligence on your business, on your team. They're going to want to build a relationship with you before they determine if it is that they trust you with their investment dollars and resources. So keep that in mind. Because sadly, out of a group of 3,000 entrepreneurs with an opportunity to present to investors, 99% are not even ready to receive the investment. They don't have their financials in order. They don't have the legal structure in place. They don't have the securities, information in place. They're not ready. And so that's such a waste because it's so difficult to get in front of qualified investors that could make a decision about funding your business. And what you don't want to do is get there and be unprepared. And also because it's not only about not receiving the funding, but the community of investors can be a reasonably small community, especially those who are serious investors. And what you don't want to do is have your reputation beat you to your next investor pitch. And sadly, I can tell you that has happened in many instances where an entrepreneur did not have it all together. And there was a lot of chatter about if that entrepreneur should be given another opportunity to present. So you don't want to be that entrepreneur. Raising capital. Raising capital is challenging, especially when you're raising the smaller amounts, 100 to 3 million. Those amounts are very small, and so typical investors, where I indicated like the family offices, venture capitalists, institutional investors, typically have a minimum, meaning they won't look at a financing requirement until there is a minimum of a certain amount required. But at the same time, there has to be a horizon that says this business, if I invest this minimum amount, has an upswing that is sufficient that we can 10x our money invested. So, for example, we're working on a raise for $25 million dollars for a business that I've created. And that's the minimum for one of the investment sources that we can present to. But with that $25 million investment, in our mind, we know that in order to 10x the return, we need to be north of at least $250 million in terms of what we see in the future for the organization. And that's just to meet the need of the equity investor. Where do we need to go for the other stakeholders who are involved in the organization? We need to show a path to a multi-billion dollar organization in order to successfully make the case for that initial $25 million investment. So where do you go when you're an early stage business and you need some initial capital because you have depleted your own personal capital, but you do still see an opportunity to proceed with your organization? So when you're in the startup phase, a great source would be friends and family. And what I like to do when I'm approaching my friends and family is to do so in a professional way. And typically, I like to use a tool called a convertible note. What a convertible note does is it allows that family member to invest in your business, and it's a way of documenting that investment. And you provide them with an annual return rate. And typically, I use my notes on about a 36-month increment so that there is an opportunity for the business to get launched through the startup phase, to gain some market traction, and to actually begin to generate some revenue, some consistent income. And then at that point, then we have a baseline to be able to measure if we were to talk about valuation. It also is a small enough period of time that is comfortable for friends and family to think about. And then the last benefit, well, there's more, but this particular benefit that I like about using a note is in the early stages of the organization, the note is not treated as equity, but in fact is treated as debt. So in the event that the business were to fail early and had to liquidate its assets, in that liquidation process, those assets would first go to repay the existing debts. So this should ensure that your friends and family feel a little more comfortable with making the early investment and not feeling that they're going to lose their money if you lose money. You, as an equity holder, can be wiped out. But if there are any resources, the debt note holders are first to be addressed. When you graduate from your friends and family, then you're looking at angels. And these are angel groups that can be individual high net worth investors, or there can be groups of high net worth individuals who have organized themselves in such a way that they and sometimes invest either individually or they might syndicate funds to make an investment in a particular organization. And so the angel groups, the high net worth individuals, they will require equity, which is an interest in the firm. And they're typically, most high net worth individuals select areas that they're familiar with. So This is why it's so important to do the research on that high net worth individual before you approach them, because oftentimes they won't invest outside of areas of comfort or knowledge. So it doesn't make sense to waste their time or your time approaching them if they don't invest in your particular sector, because it's a waste of everyone's time. And it's sort of like you could have done a little bit more homework in order to find someone that actually invests in your space. And so, with an equity investment from an individual or an angel group, they are looking for a defined exit and a methodology behind how you plan to get to that exit in the future. So, where are some of these angels located? There are around over 250,000 across the US, and on average it seems that they invest over $26 billion a year. Over 50,000 companies have received investments. Angels are typically more active these days, providing capital. They've actually become probably a larger segment of investors. I noticed the trend really picked up following the Great Recession, and in the early 2010, about 10 years ago, a number of groups really began to gain more traction and organization around how they wanted to deploy capital. And typically, what you see, a lot of that had to do with the demographic of the baby boomers. As the baby boomers exit organizations, many of them exited with rich pension plans and resources. And some of them have the spirit and desire to remain active. And one of the best ways that they can be active is to support up and coming entrepreneurs. A great benefit of angels is that they are typically perceived as patient money, and they help to fill that gap of funding that is typically too small for larger, more structured organizations to consider, but is very critical to ensuring that businesses are able to receive some funding and innovators are rewarded with an opportunity to go to market. So when we think about angels, typically, again, this is typically, they invest about $50,000 a year, and it can take anywhere from 2 to 3 months for them to complete their due diligence process and make that investment. Sadly, about 52% of them lose money. But those that produce a return, that 7% that's producing a return is typically 10x their original investment. So that's the motivation for doing it. But because the losses can be so significant and are at such a high rate, they still go through deep due diligence on the front end to determine the risk. And so this is why it's so important for you to prepare your presentation and to demonstrate that you've looked at the financial risk and you recognize that not all businesses succeed, and that you recognize in that possibility of business that if your business doesn't succeed, what that might look like for the investor. Investors want to know that you recognize their money pretty much as if it's your money, because if they deploy that capital, then you are now in charge with delivering for them this promised return. Where could you go to identify some of these angels? Gust is one of those platforms, and there's a lot of information there, so you can go directly to the site and learn more about Gust. F6S is another site that is supported by a number of angels as well as accelerators and other funds. And then there's also resources and information there. Angel List at angel.co is another network that supports the startup ecosystem. And you can not only find resources in terms of talent, but also now opportunities in terms of looking at new ventures that have been created and will be launched. Some of them are available there as well. So when we think about capital, I use two terms. I said incubators and accelerators. And so these are organizations now that have been formed, some independent, many of them as an economic development tool by cities and communities. Also, they are available at college campuses nowadays. Many college campuses have set up incubators or accelerators. And then there are private groups that have set up incubators and accelerators with the aim of fostering innovation and new venture creation. Some of them operate within particular sectors that they're looking to innovate. Some of them accept across the board businesses. Depending upon your industry or sector, you want to see if there is an incubator or accelerator within your community. One, especially that supports your sector, can be really valuable because what happens is a lot of these high net worth individual and angel groups also are involved with these particular incubators and accelerators. And if they are supporting a particular sector, then now you've increased your probability of meeting the type of investor that you would need to support your business. So that's a good network that you want to begin to cultivate. Here are some examples of some of the popular incubators and accelerators, and Techstars and Y Combinator. I mean, some of these have become so well regarded that they are like compared to, an Ivy League experience in and of themselves in terms of their ability to not only identify, but to help to develop new innovative products and services and facilitate those entrepreneurs getting to market, getting the necessary capital, and being able to grow and scale those organizations. But thanks to the Jobs Act that was passed some years back, actually passed under the Obama administration, we have additional tools available, one called crowdfunding. Crowdfunding allows different platforms to help you with facilitating raising equity capital for your business. Before the Jobs Act, the ability to raise capital using the public was limited to publicly traded companies. In fact, that's why a company transitions from a privately held organization to a publicly traded company is because it increases their ability to secure capital. But in doing so, it also increases the scrutiny that the organization must operate within and under. The company has to have transparent financials as well as regular updates as it relates to the projections and its performance. The company has to disclose any types of litigation and other things. So as you begin to think about it, being a publicly traded company sets a requirement that you need to be at a sufficient size and scale to pursue that as a funding option. Well, thanks to the Jobs Act, crowdfunding has become a mechanism that allows smaller, even startup organizations to get started and be able to use that as a tool. And so there are several sites that you could consider to look at and set up a tool, a campaign. Again, I mentioned IPOs, selling, and then institutional VCs are like organizations that have set up venture funds where they're investing in up and coming organizations. VC companies, they're again a smaller group out there, but these are typically managed professionally. And The floor typically is about a $10 million investment. Now, because the VCs have watched the angel groups be really active lately, don't be surprised if you see some VCs creating micro funds, but not all. And it's because they look at the requirements, what they pay for the capital. Because remember, not all VCs are using their own money. That's typically the transition between the high net worth individuals, angel groups who are investing using their own private funds versus a fund that has now taken in investments from a number of sources. And then their assignment is to deploy that capital for a return. So they have to be even more selective with the organizations that they identify and choose to deploy those funds to. So less than 1% of the funds or opportunities that are presented are actually funded. But when VCs get in, these are some of the companies that you see who have been benefactors of those investments. So Uber, Google Ventures was an institutional investor. Dropbox, Sequoia Capital, which is a VC fund that's well known. Airbnb, Andreessen Horowitz is a popular VC fund that typically invests. So those types of organizations. Lately, I don't know if you've been following the news, but you've probably heard a lot of conversation about SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies. This is when a privately held firm purchases a publicly traded but dormant organization and then returns to being publicly traded. So it's a reverse merger. And it allows that company to go on and acquire a business and then resume being publicly traded. Again, it requires an upfront investment, and the company that you merge with has to have the ability to generate sufficient revenues, because again, now it's going to become a publicly traded organization and be required to the scrutiny and revealing the types of financials and strategic plans that other publicly traded companies are required to provide. Some last resources to consider are microloans, which can be available from the Small Business Administration, and understanding working with banks for things like commercial loans or bank term that are supporting SBA loans. And so for some of the capital available through the Small Business Administration, you can go to sba.gov. And as a result of the global pandemic, the SBA has offered specific coronavirus-related programs. You may have heard of them as both the Payroll Protection Program, which was administered typically through your business bank, and then the EIDL loan, which was the Economic Impact Disaster Loan that has been made available through the Small Business Administration direct to businesses, offering up to 25-year term at a fixed interest rate of 3.75%. That's even better than the normal SBA rate. So if you have not applied for an EIDL loan, definitely see if your business qualifies, because that is an opportunity for capital at an extremely low rate at this time. And they increase the loan amounts that you can get up to $500,000 without a significant amount of collateral requirement. There are collateral requirements, but it's not the usual collateral requirements. So definitely explore that possibility. There are community financial development institutions. So, for example, if you don't qualify for some of the other programs, you have CDFIs that have mission-driven initiatives. And because of those initiatives, they look for opportunities to, again, fund businesses that typically are unable to secure capital from other sources. Earlier, I mentioned about if you have equipment, then you can use things like equipment or inventory, accounts receivables as leverage, as collateral to receive other types of financing. Private guarantees. The SBA acts as a private guarantor when your business is seeking a loan from a bank and your business doesn't necessarily qualify on its own to receive that funding. So the SBA steps in and tells the lender, listen, if you make this loan, we are going to guarantee 90% of the loan in the event of a default. We'll have you, the loan will only be at risk for 10%. That 10% is the equity that you as the business owner are required to contribute to the loan. So if you need a loan of $200,000, then you are required to contribute 20%, $20,000 towards that 90% of the financing. Equipment leasing. That's using the equipment itself as the collateral for financing. If you happen to have created a film, a book, and you have royalties, there are lenders that will actually use those royalties, that cash flow stream, and allow you to get a loan against it. If you have a 401k, that too is a source for a potential loan against your 401k. Excuse me. As I mentioned early on, but you need to make sure that you have your financial statements in order. And here are just a few things to consider. You want to make sure that you prepare a balance sheet. The balance sheet basically is a snap sheet. It shows the worth of the firm on a given date. It has your assets, your liabilities, and the owner's equity. You also want to prepare a P&L, known as a profit and loss, or also called an income statement. And this statement is the moving picture that gives an illustration of how your expenses are comparing against the revenues over a period of time. The aim is to see how your income and expenses are flowing through your organization and if there are any gaps, but also to determine if you are making a profit or loss or anticipate to make that in the end. And so you're looking at your net income, your sales revenue less your expenses, and this is pre-tax. So what you want to understand, again, your cash flow. And so what your cash flow statement basically identifies, when you typically are doing a pro forma, you're going to forecast 12 to 36 months out in terms of your projected earning and expenses and the types over a period of time. And this is what a lender or an investor is looking at to see what some of the triggers are that are going to impact that potential growth. And finally, when you are making assumptions in preparing these financial statements, you need to create the notes to the financial statements, meaning you need to create the narrative for someone looking at the figures, because the figures by themselves are just figures on a page. They need to understand, oh, if you show revenues of we're going to generate $100,000 in a given month, what does that mean? Does that mean that you sold 20,000 widgets? Does that mean that you provided service to 100 patients? What does that particularly mean in terms of the assumptions that you made to come up with those numbers? That's what your notes to the financial statements provide. Finally, there are two documents that if you were raising equity from third parties, you will want to become familiar with a PPM, which is a private placement memorandum, and a term sheet. And those are tools that would be introduced to you by your securities attorney. So, for example, your business plan is presented to your securities attorney, and then they pull out the elements of the business plan and turn it into a legal document that is used for the purposes of raising capital. And then that is used by either the company would present you with their term sheet of what it is they're willing to offer and what it is they're seeking as it relates to offering that particular capital. So here are some research resources for you. CEO Express is a great portal. It's a repository that connects you to several resources. And again, Census, the Los Angeles Public Library, CDFI Fund, Gust, Angel.co, and F6S. And I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to share today this information on access to capital for businesses 101. I hope that I was able to present you with a good foundation. And again, I'd like to thank the Los Angeles Public Library for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
And thank you, Dr. Ardrey, for your amazingly detailed presentation. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to any questions that our viewers may have. If you have a question, just go ahead and drop it in the chat for either YouTube or Facebook, wherever it is you're watching with us today. And while we wait for some questions to come in, Dr. Ardrey, your program today was in partnership with SCORE, which is a nonprofit organization of business mentors. What kind of resources does SCORE offer, and how did you come about to volunteer with their nonprofit?
Absolutely. SCORE is an amazing resource. In fact, I think everyone should be familiar with the SCORE in your particular community. SCORE has chapters across the nation and is a partner with the Small Business Administration. And so if you are an entrepreneur and you want a mentor that can assist you with your business, SCORE has volunteers that volunteer to mentor you, and they bring their background. So if you need a finance mentor, if you need help with marketing, if you need help with operations, chances are your local SCORE office has someone with the background and experience necessary to support your business. I am not an active mentor for the organization, but I present workshops and training for the organization. And I've been a SCORE trainer for about 10 years or more now. And the reason that I was asked to complete these trainings was in Los Angeles, shoots now probably about 20 something years ago, 25 years ago, when I was expanding my business to the market, there was a big issue, a civil unrest around the Rodney King incident. And at that time, the Small Business Administration was looking for ways to help to strengthen the inner city operated companies. And so I developed a training program where I trained probably somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 5,000 businesses on how to properly prepare their businesses to receive capital and to be able to present their businesses to the Small Business Administration so that they could receive support. And so it was the success of those programs and the outcomes of those entrepreneurs that several district representatives with SCORE and the SBA knew my name. So when I said I was ready to come back to market and was willing to train again, they asked me to provide some content for SCORE. And so I've been training for them ever since.
Awesome. Well, we are really grateful that you are doing that with SCORE because today's presentation was phenomenal. Looks like nobody had any particular questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up today's program. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, and thank you, SCORE, for providing this free program on how to access capital for your business.